Greetings, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are indeed living in biblical times. I want to remind you guys, you are watching this on the Synagogue News. Remember to think like a Neanderthal and go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy the content. By the way, while you're doing that, consider liking and sharing this video. Consider hitting that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live every Tuesday and Thursday with episodes of The Watchdog. And I also want to have discussions, debates, and interviews posting every Wednesday. Sometimes difficult to get that part out. It's actually sometimes difficult to get it all out, honestly, considering the scheduling we have here. But considering how small the program is, it can be very difficult to get that Wednesday episode out, which is actually not officially part of the podcast. But nonetheless, I digress. Please consider hitting that bell to get notified whenever we go live. We're going to try and do these in the mornings, 10 to 10:30, like we're doing it right now. And we're going to try and do this, like I said, every Tuesday, every Thursday, and every Wednesday, have a debate, discussion, or interview. Hopefully that is something we can accomplish. Let's see, what kind of announcements do we have? Not really much, actually, not really much. So let's just remember, again, please like, share, and subscribe. Please hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. If you guys want to follow us on social media, you certainly can do so. I am on Gab, Parler, Minds, Twitter, and Facebook at the Synagogue. Hopefully we'll actually get the description filled up with some stuff here in a moment. But nonetheless, if you're on any of those different websites, please do consider following me on those different websites, sharing this video to those different websites. And while I'm at this, I would like to emphasize specifically getting a Gab or a Parler account, especially if you're already on Twitter, or a MeWe or Telegram account if you are on Facebook. Why? Well, because these are websites which will defend your internet free speech, and the best way, in fact, the only way that we're actually going to manage to take back free speech on the internet is by using alternative social media platforms that will not censor. So here on The Watchdog, we are big fans of DuckDuckGo, big fans of Gab and Parler, big fans of MeWe and Telegram, big fans of Rumble, and Rumble also takes some particular significance for us because it's very likely that this program will at some point be canceled. Now, obviously, it's not going to literally be canceled, right? But in the sense that the YouTube gods probably will not be very fond of this content for much longer. We've already had videos taken down despite having a very small viewer base. So if the viewer base increases, it's very likely that we'll have more strikes on this channel. So please consider going to Rumble and subscribing to the Synagogue there, where you can get videos after the fact, meaning not live. And, of course, where you'll always have a backup just in case we do ever end up getting removed. Let's see what we have to talk about today. Let me get my camera on. I just noticed that my camera is not on. Shalom, gents. How's it going? So we got some interesting things to talk about for certain. We got things to talk about with the World Council of Churches, with the World Economic Forum, things with gun control, things with gay marriage. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we want to try and be relatively quick going through all of it. I probably won't actually finish the articles that I'm reading today, except for a couple because they're incredibly important. But nonetheless, this is a very big show, and we're actually going to completely skip the little pre-story conversation that we have here and go straight into some of the stories as a result. So, very first story we're going to be going into today, which we'll be talking about relatively quickly. RedDUDlicans move to codify gay marriage. Bet you didn't see that one coming. That's right, RedDUDlicans have moved to codify gay marriage. Recently, as many of you know, Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Roe v. Wade was overturned because it was completely and totally unconstitutional, and the justices who did overturn Roe v. Wade need to be commended, though I still have my skepticisms about them, absolutely. They absolutely need to be commended. We need to give credit where credit is due, right? Jackson v. Dobbs is what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know, it happened on June the 24th of this year, 2022. By the way, it is currently August the 2nd, 2022. And on that day, we saw the repeal of Roe v. Wade by the courts via Jackson v. Dobbs. And as a result, numerous states now have or will have very shortly laws against abortion, criminalizing the absolutely detestable act, right? Well, Clarence Thomas, one of the justices on the court, said after that that this was going to be a cause, and he was saying this in a positive manner. In other words, this is what he would want, this was going to be cause for us to look at some other rulings in the past that were probably not legitimate according to him. For example, Obergefell versus Hodges, I believe it is, which is the 2015 ruling that said that gay marriage was actually legal, that any state that was repealing a gay marriage was in fact not allowed to do so. I remember that very well, actually, being only 17 years old when that occurred. Well, because he said that, a lot of people think that that's actually the trajectory that we're going. In other words, a lot of people think Obergefell will be revoked. And for the record, though I don't actually agree with the government getting involved in marriage, Obergefell should be revoked. It should be repealed. It's certainly an unconstitutional act. There's no constitutional right to homosexual marriage. At best, you could say that there's potentially a annoyance there of the state getting involved in marriage and stuff like that, which is one of the arguments that I would make. But the federal government certainly has no business codifying it, and there certainly is no constitutional precedent for saying, hey, this is actually an unconstitutional law, namely a law that says homosexuals cannot get married. In 2015, when that was actually passed, my own state, Idaho, was a state where homosexuals could not get married. Well, fast forward to August, actually technically July, because this happened just a couple days ago, but nonetheless, fast forward to July of 2022, and now the Republican Party, some in the Republican Party, I should emphasize, not all, as well as the Democratic Party, of course, are trying to codify gay marriage and make it federally legal so that it cannot, in fact, be overturned. Now, I was just talking about how I don't think the state should necessarily be involved in marriage, but that doesn't mean the state necessarily has to recognize marriages either, right? And it certainly applies to the federal government codifying marriage, right? In other words, the federal government has no constitutional authority whatsoever to codify homosexual marriage and say, hey, it is legitimate. But that is what they're going to do now. And the party of family values, the party of conservatism, the party of quote-unquote Christian nationalism, which, of course, is just a insult, kind of like fascism, racism, stuff like that. There are real Christian nationalists, don't get me wrong. But when you're calling somebody who just simply believes things like you shouldn't rip babies apart in the womb, I don't know. I mean, it sounds crazy to me, but that was sarcasm, by the way. At any rate, that party should definitely not be, I guess, going against what we would consider to be some of its core values, right? So we're going to go ahead and read this article here. Very interesting stuff. Republicans are not only looking to codify Roe v. Wade, Republicans are also looking to have some pretty nasty gun control passing here. So all very interesting, none very good. Real quickly, I want to acknowledge Richard Neal in the live chat. Richard Neal also points out that states were passing defensive marriage acts, or DOMAs, and that they were ruled as unconstitutional. So how is it unconstitutional to defend marriage for what it definitionally is, but not unconstitutional for the federal government to shove gay marriage down your throat? Well, I don't have any idea. But apparently, the Republicans in Congress do have some kind of idea, and as a result, they are voting to codify gay marriage. So let's get into this article here. We have Kevin's Biblical Discussions with us as well. I appreciate you guys. This is from CBS News. House passes same-sex marriage bill with 47 Republicans and every Democrat voting in favor. 47 Republicans. I would just like to point out how dramatic of a shift this is from just 8 years ago when Obergefell was actually passed. I guess it'd be 7 years ago, right? How dramatic of a shift this is. Who could imagine 7 years ago, 47 different conservatives, Republicans, family values, Christians, etc., actually moving to pass a codification at the federal level. Not only is that federal overreach, but it's just grossly inaccurate. No offense to gay people, but gay marriage is just not a thing, right? Should you have the right to do what you wish, so long as you're not victimizing anybody? I do think that that's true. That doesn't mean that the state has to endorse it, right? Let me give you a perfect example of that. I don't think you should be illegal for picking some chick up at the bar and then spending one night and one night alone with her. That being said, it's evil and you shouldn't do it, right? And the federal government certainly has no right to codify your supposed right to do so, right? But nonetheless, who could have imagined 7 years ago 47 different RedDUDlicans? By the way, that's what I'm going to start calling them, RedDUDlicans. I was telling you guys a while back that I think rhinos is a stupid title because rhinos are actually incredibly awesome creatures. So I'm going to start calling them duds or RedDUDlicans. Duds because RedDUDlican, also because they are duds and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Also, you could say Democrats using dummies. So try and spread that. Anyways, 7 years ago, could you imagine 47 different RedDUDlicans actually sitting here and voting to codify something like a Obergefell v. Hodges? I certainly could not have seen that 7 years ago. Certainly could have seen it coming, don't get me wrong. The trajectory of the Republican Party is always going farther and farther and farther to the left. The trajectory of culture is always going farther and farther and farther to the left. But it's just amazing to me. 7 years ago, we have this country that talks about, oh, you guys are fascists. You guys are trying to bring us back 50 years. You guys are trying to do this, set up this Christian theocracy and all this other kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the people who are being accused of all that stuff, 47 of them are actually moving to codify this and make a federal law saying this is just legit, right? Anyways, let's go ahead and read the article here. 1 second. So, the House on Tuesday. When exactly was Tuesday? Well, this article was published. Actually, let me get the exact date because I might get the date wrong. July 21st. All right, July 21st is when this article was published. So, this would be on I think, might have been a Thursday, if I'm remembering correctly. So, this would have been July the 20th. Anyways, the House on Tuesday passed the Respect for Marriage Act, which would protect marriage equally by repealing the Defense of Marriage Act and providing federal protections for same-sex and interracial couples. The bill passed 267 to 157, with 47 Republicans joining every Democrat voting in favor of the bill. Notice that those 47 Republicans would not have actually been necessary. It would have still gotten 220 votes, which is over the 218 that is necessary to pass a bill. However, with that being said, they voted with it anyways. Congressional Democrats mounted the legislative response this week to concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas, suggesting the Supreme Court decisions involving access to contraception and same-sex marriage should be reconsidered, with lawmakers holding on a pair of bills that aim to address concerns that more rights could be rolled back. Now, it's important for us to know you don't have a right to something like contraceptions, right? To contraceptives, excuse me. Now, should the state withhold you from actually having things like condoms and birth control? I don't think so. I do think that birth control is unhealthy and women should not take it. So if you're going to do something like that, buy a condom. But with that being said, now granted, obviously all the individual ladies are going to do whatever they want to do, right? But with that being said, it's not something that you have a right to. We do need to kind of reclaim this word right? Because rights are something that are inherent. Rights are something that are inalienable. Rights are something which are given via God and codified in our country, at least by the United States Constitution. When people say things like we have health care, you don't have the right to possess health care. You see what I'm saying? When people say you have a right to a certain wage, not really. No. Nobody's obligated to pay you a certain wage. Really, if you want to get technical, there's no real right to wage at all. Minimum wage laws are a good thing, probably, but they're not something that you actually have a right to. It's not an inalienable right that you get paid at least $15 an hour or $7.25 an hour or what have you. Right? Same thing we have going on here. You don't have an inalienable right given by God to condoms. Okay, that's ridiculous. Now, should you have the freedom to purchase them if you'd like? I think so. But with that being said, that is a misuse of the word rights, and we need to make sure that we're not allowing people to misuse the word rights. Rights are only those inalienable freedoms. I was going to say rights again, but you don't want to use the definition of the word in the definition, right? Rights are only those inalienable freedoms which are And if you want to use an atheistic way of describing that, you can say natural law if you like, but I think that they're the same thing. All right. While the Supreme Court struck down sections of DOMA in U.S. versus Windsor and Obergefell versus Hodges, the law still remains on the books, quote unquote. The law, it's kind of like how there was a lot of abortion laws on the books in various different states before Jackson v. Dobbs, but none of them were actually enforced, right? The lower chamber will also take up later this week the Right to Contraception Act, which, if passed, could create a statutory right for people to access birth control and protect a range of contraceptive methods, as well as ensure healthcare providers have a right to provide contraception services to patients. If anybody in the live chat is able to actually fact check on whether or not that was passed, I am not aware as to whether or not it was passed. And that would be some good information for us to tell everybody. But nonetheless, quote, House Democrats are not waiting for elections to protect our rights and freedom. We're fighting now to keep abortion and birth control legal and stop corporate price gouging, end quote. Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted Monday, quote, we won't let Republicans crush our rights and pad corporate pockets on our watch, end quote. Now, of course, the very ironic thing about that is that it's the corporate pockets that are padded actually every single June when they decide to roll out all of their different 6-color rainbow logos, which, by the way, the rainbow has 7 colors, but nonetheless, I digress on that. And of course, it's also very interesting that this is something that she believes is, again, a quote unquote right. You don't have a right to condoms. You don't have a right to sleep with somebody of the same sex. You don't have a right to, especially get an abortion. And that one's not even one that should be a freedom for that matter. But we do have to differentiate between our rights and our freedoms. They are not the same thing. Rights are inalienable. Rights we possess regardless of if the government recognizes it or not. Freedoms are things that we probably should be able to do, but they're not rights. Nobody's violating your rights if you can't buy a condom. Nobody's violating your rights if they don't recognize your same-sex union. That's not how that works. Now, you have some arguments that could be made as far as should the state be making this kind of stuff illegal? I don't think the state should be withholding your ability to actually get a contraception. And I certainly don't want the state involved in my bedroom. I can kind of sympathize, in other words, with some of the arguments that come from the other side. With that being said, it is not your right. If anything, it's a freedom. House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, a Republican from Louisiana, said most Republicans will likely oppose the bill involving contraception, but he predicted ahead of the vote that GOP lawmakers will be split on the same-sex marriage proposal. Both measures are still expected to clear the Democratic-led House, which, of course, makes sense. Ooh, wow. Excuse me. But let's see, I already read that part here. Are expected to clear the Democratic-led House and join a pair of bills designed to protect abortion access that passed the House last week and are awaiting action in the Senate, which we will be reading about on Thursday. But with Republican and Democrat controlled, or with Republicans and Democrats each controlling, 50 seats in the upper chamber, the path to winning approval in the Senate is a difficult one. Support from at least, by the way, that's not exactly accurate. There's, I think, 50 Republican or Democrats in the Senate and 48 Republicans with 2 independents, Angus King and Bernie Sanders. But anyways, support from at least 10 Senate Republicans is needed for any bill to advance. Need at least 60 votes for a bill to advance the Senate. While the 2 measures involving abortion, one would enshrine the right to an abortion into federal law, and the other would ban states from interfering with a woman's right to travel to the procedure. Again, we'll read about those on Thursday. Have little chance of becoming law. It's unclear whether the bills protecting same-sex marriage and access to contraception will meet the same fate. And by the way, regardless of your opinions on contraception and same-sex marriage, the federal government has no business involved in either of them, period, right? I was just talking about how I don't think the state should make it illegal for somebody to go buy a condom, okay? I might agree with that. However, the federal government has no business being involved at all. Before we even get to the point where, hey, do you think condoms should be legal, yes or no? That's a state-level conversation. If we're at the federal government, it's like, no, this conversation is stopping. It's over. You're not having it. And the same thing thing goes with same-sex marriage. And for the record, the same thing even goes with abortion there. These are things which, according to the federalist system that we have laid out in our Constitution via the 10th Amendment, these are things which belong to the states. Things which are not directly addressed in the Constitution are rights withheld, or not withheld, excuse me. What is the word the Constitution uses? I can't even remember right now, but they are rights basically that the state themselves has full control over, people or the state, right? So, for example, murder laws are passed on the state level. Your speeding laws are passed on the state level. Your driver's licensing laws are passed on the state level. Your marijuana laws should be passed on the state level. All of these things are things which should be at the state level, and that includes abortion, contraception, same-sex marriage. Now, should we have 50 individual bans on abortion? Absolutely. Should any of the 50 states be recognizing, not making illegal, recognizing same-sex marriages? No, they should not. And should any of the 50 states be creating impossibility when it comes to buying a condom? No. With that being said, it's not the federal government's place. It is those states' place. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out, either by their rights or by the Constitution, how making contraceptions illegal would be violating rights. Again, I don't think you should do it. I think that it's stupid. I think it's a violation of your freedoms. Certainly, free people do not ask the government permission to wear a rubber. But with that being said, it is still something the states could legitimately debate over. It is not something the federal government could legitimately debate over. It's not your job. Butt out, kick rocks, pound sand. Any other way that I could put it, I will put it. Consider it put, basically, right? When you look at the House vote, and you look, quote, when you look at the House vote, wait a minute, hang on. One Republican, Susan Collins of Maine, is a backer of the marriage equality measure, and GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said she would like to see contraception and same-sex marriage rights protected under federal law. Why? Murkowski explained to me, constitutionally speaking, why that is something that should happen. You can't do it. I challenge you to do so, but you can't do it. Guarantee you can't do it. In fact, you don't even have to use the original Constitution. You can use the entire Constitution as it stands today with all of its new amendments and stuff like that, things like a constitutional originalist like me would disagree with, right? Go ahead and use the whole thing, and I'll let you use the Articles of Confederation, each of the 50 states' individual constitutions. We'll throw in the Texas National Constitution, the Confederate Constitution, the Iroquois Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers. We'll throw all those in. Find me therein a right, especially at the federal level, to same-sex marriage and contraceptions. I'll wait. I'm not wearing a watch, but we'll wait. Anyways, other Republicans, too, have indicated they'll support the measure since its passage by the House. Senator Rob Portman of Ohio is co-sponsoring the Senate's version of the measure. His office said, and Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina said he probably will vote to enshrine the right to same-sex marriage into federal law. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell declined to state his position on the bill. And, of course, Senator Mitch McConnell is a feckling weakling. So whatever it is that the people want is probably what he'll do. Although sometimes he shocks us, like with the whole Merrick Garland thing. That was 7 years ago, of course. Quote, when you look at the House vote and you look at just the shifting sentiments about the issue across the country, I think this is an issue that many Americans, regardless of your political affiliation, feel has been resolved, end quote, Portman told reporters, adding the bill is an important message. Now, I certainly would disagree with that. Although I also, in a way, would agree. It has been resolved in the sense that Scripture is clear. It has been resolved in the sense that nature is clear. It has been resolved in the sense that we have known since the dawn of human existence that sticks and sticks do not make babies. Pretty simple, right? Now, as far as being settled in our country, obviously that's not true. The fact of the matter is our flagrant celebration of same-sex marriage is a problem, right? Our recognizing same-sex marriages at a state or federal level is a problem. I don't think, as I've said before, as I've said in this episode, I don't think that it is the state's place to arrest homosexuals for doing what it is that they do. I do think, however, that the state, the federal government, regardless of which government it is, has no business codifying or recognizing a same-sex union. That doesn't mean they make it illegal. Like I said, you should have, so long as you're not hurting anybody, you have the right to do whatever you like in the confines of your own home. But should the state be recognizing it, be endorsing it, saying this is definitionally a marriage? No, absolutely not. And there are consequences to that kind of thing, right? There are major consequences to that kind of thing. Drag Queen Story Hour is a consequence to that kind of thing. People saying that NAMBLA is a legitimate organization, that's a consequence to this kind of thing. Or minor attracted persons, that's a consequence to this sort of thing. Note, I'm not saying all homosexuals are minor attracted persons. I am, however, saying that it is kind of a thing in the gay community for teenage boys and teenage girls to date 20 and 30-year-old men. And y'all know that's true because y'all joke about it all the time. We could pull up a whole litany of videos, whether it be a Milo Yiannopoulos or some other character, making that exact same point. So don't say I'm being bigoted here when I say that y'all have an issue with 14-year-old boys marrying and dating and things like that 30-year-old men. Okay? There are consequences to this kind of thing. Now, there are consequences to a lot of things that the state should not necessarily be involved in. For example, if the entire society is drunk, there's going to be some consequences. That doesn't mean you should make alcohol illegal. Probably should not endorse being drunk, though, at the state level, right? I don't know. Call me crazy, but I think that that's just not a very wise decision. Same thing that we have going on here. It is not good to endorse these kinds of things at a national level or at a state level or at a societal level. It is good for us to look at these kinds of things and say, X, no, don't like, not good, very bad. That doesn't mean you go to jail. That doesn't mean we beat you up. That doesn't mean we call you names. It does mean that we recognize the sinfulness of your actions, societally speaking. I don't think that that's a problem. I would challenge any homosexual out there to show me where that is a problem. By the way, consider subscribing to the Synagogue on Rumble because this will probably get taken down. Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, told reporters Monday that he believed the two bills poised for House action this week would garner the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster. Quote, notice how quiet the Republicans were when the same-sex marriage issue finally emerged during the Obama administration, end quote, he said Monday. They get it. They're on the wrong side of history. Now, of course, the wrong side of history is a really stupid term because first off, who cares about being on the wrong side of history, right? George Washington's on the wrong side of history, according to these morons. So I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, I sincerely do not give a singular shit. Please excuse my French, but I don't care at all. In fact, being on the wrong side of history at this point in 2022 would be like a badge of honor. Like I would plaster that, like they do their military medals, veterans do, right? I would plaster that on my chest and wear it proudly. Wrong side of history. But at any rate, the saying itself is absolutely ridiculous, as if history is a conscientious being that is somehow deciding these bad, those good. Yeah, it's not a thing. You can't be on the wrong side of history because history is simply us looking back into the past. There's no sides. But at any rate, in remarks on the Senate floor Wednesday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he wants to bring the marriage equality bill to the floor and has spoken with Senator Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat from Wisconsin, about talking with Republicans about their support. Both bills, meanwhile, are supported by the White House, of course, which urged passage by the House. Quote, the right to marriage confers vital legal protections, dignity, and full participation in our society, end quote, the Office of Management and Budget said in a statement of the marriage equality bill. Quote, no person should face discrimination because of who they are or whom they love, and every married couple in the United States deserves the security of knowing that their marriage will be defended and respected, end quote. Now, of course, there's a level of truth to that. Marriage should be defended and respected. Marriage is a union between a man and a woman, not a union between a man and 3 women, not a union between a man and a child, not a union between a man and a man, believe it or not. And the other thing that we actually have to remember here is when it comes to things like these, so they said marriage confers things like legal protection, dignity, and full participation in our society. Well, you can be, as a homosexual who doesn't have a legally recognized marriage, you can still have full participation in society. And as a homosexual who does not have a legally recognized marriage, you can still have dignity, I guess. I would consider it kind of degrading to do that kind of stuff, but obviously you have dignity in the sense that they're talking about, right? Which is not very much, but whatever. So those legal protections is really what they're trying to, or those, excuse me. Let me get another drink of my coffee here. I got a really scratchy throat today. I apologize. So those legal protections are really what they are talking about. Now, what kind of legal protections would they be talking about? Well, there's obviously things like visiting a loved one in a hospital, right? There's certain tax benefits that you get as a married couple. Rights to children, I would assume, are accompanied here, which is a completely different question, whether or not homosexuals should be having children or not. I tend to waffle a little bit on that, to be honest with you. What I mean by that is, we do allow singles at this stage to adopt. I think that single parenthood is essentially child abuse, especially if it's chosen willingly, right? So, if you're going to allow singles to adopt kids, it doesn't really make any sense to not allow homosexual couples to adopt kids. That being said, if we did actually, first off, if we got our heads on straight about adoption, I think that would change a lot of things. Secondly, if we had some studies, some long-term studies that would indicate what the psychological effects are of homosexual parentage, I think that would go a long way to, definitively setting that issue. But I digress. We got to move forward faster than I am. Quote, no person should face discrimination because of who they are or who they love, and every married couple in the United States deserves the security of knowing that their marriage will be defended and respected. And this is one of those things you always have to remember. You got to just read between the lines. You got to get rid of all the fluff. Do I agree that nobody should be discriminated against because of who they love? Yeah, I do. In fact, that even applies to a polygamist, for example. If I were to meet a Muslim with 3 wives who just came over from Somalia, right? I don't think he should be discriminated against. I don't think I should recognize his 3 marriages, though. You see how those are different things? I can sell the dude a candy bar at the same price that I sell everybody else a candy bar. I can be nice to him and wave to him on the street. I can open doors for his wives. That doesn't mean I recognize the marriage and call it cool. Those are 2 completely different categories. They're separated from each other, right? I think that should be fairly obvious to people. Again, I use the alcohol example. I don't think it's cool for you to be a drunk. It's not okay for you to be a drunk. It is evil, wrong, no good, immoral, sinful for you to be a drunk. Does that mean I discriminate against you because you're a drunk? No, of course not. Nobody would say that. Cut through all the fluff here. What are we actually talking about? We're talking about the legal recognition and codification of same-sex union. That is not the same thing as saying it shouldn't be illegal. It is not the same thing as saying that people should not be persecuted. What you're talking about is very specific. It is legal codification and recognition, and that should not be a thing. Just the same as it shouldn't be a thing with drunks. You shouldn't codify somebody's right, quote unquote, to get plastered drunk and puke all over the sidewalk. We'll be done with this shortly. On the Right to Contraception Act, the Budget Office said access to contraception is essential to ensuring all people have control over personal decisions about their own health, lives, and family. After the overruling of Roe, which rested on the fundamental right to privacy, and I put quotes around that because while you do have a fundamental right to privacy, you do not have a fundamental right to privacy if you're raping children in your basement, or if you're torturing puppies, or if you're getting an abortion. And yes, those are in the same category of thing. If you don't think so, then get your morals checked, because they seriously need to be. At any rate, in matters of health, bodily autonomy, and family, and it has never been more important to protect and expand access to family planning services. The action from the House is Democrats' answer to the concurring opinion written by Thomas in the Supreme Court ruling overturning the constitutional right to an abortion established under Roe v. Wade. Again, get through the fluff there. There is no constitutional right to abortion. It is evil. It is detestable. It is disgusting. It should be illegal. That is one thing that should be illegal. Abortion doctors, if you're watching this, Yeah, I think you should be in prison for sure. Like, I'm not even a little bit shy about that. You should absolutely be in prison. In fact, there's an argument to be made that you should be executed, if we're being honest. But anyways, let's move on to our next article here. By the way, I see Jamie Russell and Kelby Quayle are in the live chat. Shalom, thank you very much for being here. Next thing we're going to read about, gun control coming, quote unquote, but probably not quote unquote. Actually, it looks like it's going to move forward. Say it ain't so, but indeed it is so. House passes assault weapons ban in wake of mass shootings. Now, you may notice that I actually used this exact same banner like a month ago, and that was because the House and Senate had passed a series of incentives saying, hey, we're going to incentivize monetarily red flag laws in states, right? We're going to try and reduce the capacity of magazines, although as it turns out that one ended up getting removed. All this other kind of gun control nonsense that they ended up passing. Well, guess what? There's some more. There's some more. And again, Republicans are waffling. House passes assault weapons ban in wake of mass shootings. This is H.R. 1808. This was originally written July 29th of 2022, and this is from Roll Call. The House passed a bill Friday that would ban the sale of assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines for the first time since a similar ban lapsed in 2004. The 217 to 213 vote saw 7 members cross party lines, but Democrats still overcame objections from Republicans who argued it infringes on Second Amendment rights. 5 Democrats voted against the bill, and 2 Republicans voted for it. Now, obviously, 2 Republicans is significantly less than 47. It does still show that there is something of a trend going on in our party, especially when you consider the fact that 20 Republicans had voted for the previous gun control measures, I should just say, that were passed in June of this year. The evenly divided Senate is unlikely to pass the measure, but Democrats argued Friday's vote was a needed step to counter a wave of mass shootings across the country. Let me just quickly make an aside here on this wave of mass shootings. If you believe that this wave of mass shootings is simply because people have the right to possess firearms, not only do I have a bridge or some beachfront property I'd like to sell you in Idaho, but I also think you're probably like clinically insane or maybe just mentally retarded. I'm not really sure. Sorry if that's a little bit rough for you guys, but you can just go look at any crime statistics that were taken from 10 years ago. And it gets even worse 20 years ago. And it gets even worse 50 years ago. And it gets even worse 100 years ago. And there was not even 1% of the mass shootings occurring as there is now. There's been something like 200 mass shootings since 2020 alone, if I'm remembering correctly. It might be since 2016, but since one of the election cycles. 200. That is absurd. That is ridiculous. Columbine was said to be a big, shocking, crazy thing because that didn't happen. Sandy Hook was a big and crazy and shocking thing because that didn't happen. 2017 with Nicholas Cruz? That's like not even the biggest shooting since 2017, isn't it? How is it possible that we are so quickly, so rapidly seeing an exponential growth in mass shootings? I don't think it's organic. That's the first thing. I think that there is absolutely, positively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, some conspiracy here. No doubt. Partially in that these people are not severely punished. Partially, I think, even coming down from some Kabbalistic level. What I mean by that is people who sit around in their cabals, right? Not Kabbalistic like the Jewish mysticism. Some of you may not know. Some of you may not remember. But I believe it was 2017. There was actually an Islamic terrorist camp in New Mexico that was busted for training children to go into schools and shoot them up, right? And when it was busted, the judge presiding over the case dismissed the case, saying, and I quote, "If this were a bunch of white Christians, I think we'd all be looking at this differently." Go look it up. In fact, you can even find episodes of the Watchdog that talked about it, right? That happened in real life, like for sure. And it wasn't even a conspiracy theory, by the way. It was all over mainstream news, and they very quickly forgotten. So to say that there isn't some kind of a conspiracy here, you're tripping. You are tripping. There's absolutely conspiracy here, right? But on top of that, there is cultural degradation here. Extreme cultural degradation. We live in a society that does not value human life or life at all. We live in a society that does not value transcendental ethics. We live in a society that does not value personal autonomy and freedom in a genuine sense. We live in a society that is full of me monsters. Me. And when me, the great me, the awesome me, the great I me, right? When I am offended at something, when I feel like my life isn't going the way it should be, well, I could just go ahead and make that everybody else's problem. And I can make that everybody else's problem by showing my junk to kids at a drag concert or whatever that happens to be. Concert, I guess, doesn't really make sense, but you know what I mean. Or one of the other various ways I can do it is by blasting all of my students. I mean, who cares about them? They're not me, right? They're not the great I me. Me. Did I mention myself? That is what society is today. It's a giant me monster. So not only do we have the state being unwilling to punish people, and very likely some big money, some dark money coming from upstairs, but on top of that, we have a society that is filled with degenerates. And this is one of the things that I feel like conservatives are just so hard-headed with. They feel like, oh, you know, the next generation, we can just convince the generation. It's all these fat cats up in Washington. They don't really speak for the people. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Our society is cancerous at the moment. And if you don't believe me, look at mass shootings. Look at mass shootings. Mass shootings were not a problem 20 years ago. Even 10 years ago, they were not this kind of a problem. Now, there is a mass shooting nearly every single day. Why? Because society is degenerating, because society is full of itself. Because society does not care about the bodily autonomy, freedoms, and right to life of other individuals. Isn't it funny that one of those things happens to be bodily autonomy? They don't give a damn. They do not give a damn. They are selfish, self-centered, narcissistic. They care about only one person, and that is the great I me. And it's going to continue to get worse, by the way, friends. It's going to continue to get worse. The only way we're actually going to be able to stop anything like this, quote unquote, is by cultural reformation. And in my opinion, cultural reformation is downstream from revival. So Christians best be getting your Bibles out. Best be getting your witness sharpened. Best be going out there and evangelizing. But this is going to get worse. This is absolutely going to get worse. There's no doubt about it. 6 years ago, nobody would have believed that every single day there would be a school shooting. 6 years ago, nobody would have believed that people were okay with drag queens displaying their genitals at pride events to children. 6 years ago, nobody would have believed that it would have been codified that same-sex marriage is the thing. 6 years ago, none of these things would have happened. 6 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, 6-year-old children were not born. That's how short of a time that is. I know that's a little bit of a tautology there, but just to give you an idea, you ever met a 6-year-old child? Yeah, how young that child is, how recent they have been brought into the world. Well, before they were born, none of this stuff was a thing. Obviously, it was to smaller levels. I don't mean in the sense that school shootings didn't happen and that people weren't out supporting gay marriage. But I do mean that the severity of it has just exploded, and it will get worse. You mark my words. It will get worse. At any rate, though, that's the aside. Back to the article. Quote, these military-style weapons are designed to kill the most people in the shortest amount of time, end quote. Judiciary Chairman Jared Nadler. It is Gerald, actually. Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, said during the floor debate, quote, quite simply, there is no place for them in our streets, end quote. Of course, that's a lie. course, the entire point of the Second Amendment is so that you can have military-style weaponry just in case you need to fight off an invasion or fight an insurrection or, I don't know, fight a tyrannical government. But anyways, not that that's something that the founders would be down with, of course. You know, they never, for example, shot at people who came to take their guns at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill or anything like that. I digress. The vote is the latest in a series of Democratic gun control bills to advance through the House since a wave of mass shootings this year, including an elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 19 students. And, by the way, where all the police decided to sit around on their hands and do absolutely nothing. People want to know why I, as a conservative, am not a thin blue line conservative. It's because of that. I respect cops for what they do. I think a good cop is one of the more honorable things that anybody can be. With that being said, there ain't very many of y'all anymore. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the degradation of our society. The bill, H.R. 1808, would ban, did a little jump there, would ban the sale, possession, and transfer of high-capacity magazines and assault-style weapons by both name, such as the AK-47, and features such as the pistol grip. The bill would also ban the sale of some firearm accessories like pistol braces. The Biden administration backs the bill Friday, quote, "We know an assault weapons ban and large capacity magazine ban will save lives," end quote, an administration statement said. And of course, we don't know any such thing. There's no evidence to suggest any such thing is true. People will always point out, oh, see, gun violence goes down when you make guns illegal. Yes, but violence doesn't go down. And by the way, gun violence goes down in a very limited sense, right? So, for example, there's not as much suicides when you ban high-capacity magazines and stuff like that. We know from European countries and stuff like that that's the case. But as far as criminals getting a hold of guns and shooting up places, I mean, the most vicious terrorist attacks of the last 10 years have all been in Europe, right? I guess there was the nightclub shooting in Orlando, so not all in Europe, but most of them have been in Europe, right? There was the attacks in Paris. There was an attack recently in Norway. It's actually this year. There was a much larger attack in Norway, something like 10 years ago. I think it was 2012. But nonetheless, obviously, the UK at this point is notorious for having terrorist attacks. And, you know, you can go and move forward with this. Like, for example, the most crime-ridden cities in America with cartels and violent thugs roaming the streets are cities where gun control is very strongly enforced. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, etc. So it's true in a very limited sense, right? It's true in the sense that, for example, suicides by gun go down or murders by gun go down, you know, in the sense of like a one-off event, right? Like a guy going off and shooting his cheating lover or something like that. But as far as deaths total and as far as things like terrorism, mass shooting, crime in the organized sense, those do not go down when gun control measures are enacted. And we know this quite well. We have plenty of evidence from plenty of European countries and from plenty of big liberal cities that demonstrate this. Democrats argue that the prior assault weapons ban reduced mass shootings. Not true. Sorry, this keeps kind of, I don't know what the word is. I do know what the word is, but I'm losing it right now for some stupid reason. Anyways, refreshing, that's what it is. This keeps refreshing on its own for some reason, so I apologize. Anyways, we know an assault weapons ban and large capacity magazine ban will save lives. Democrats argue that the prior assault weapons ban reduced mass shootings and that rifles such as AR-15 have become a favorite of mass killers. They described graphically the damage high-powered rifles can do to the human body. Now, of course, they don't even know anything at all about these weapons. In fact, just the other, what was it? It wasn't the other day. It was like 3 years ago now. But anyways, some of you may recall CNN talking about high-capacity assault rifle, and they were using a shotgun. And they were shooting watermelons with a shotgun and saying, this is the damage that will be done to you by an AR-15. It was hilarious. It was genuinely hilarious. It would be more hilarious if these people weren't actively influencing the mass morons in our society. The mass amount of morons, I should say. Hey, that's an alliteration. Cool. Anyways, Republicans argued the bill would violate the Second Amendment, which of course it would. Ohio Representative Jim Jordan called it a gun grab, which of course it is. Quote, For years, the Democrats told us we're not coming for your guns. Oh, yes, they are, end quote, Jordan said. And we would be wise to listen to certain Democrats when they slip. For example, Beto O'Rourke said, hell yes, we're coming for your AR-15 in the 2016 presidential election, or excuse me, in the 2020 presidential election. He was not bullshitting. Again, please excuse my French. He was not pulling your tail, right? He was not sitting there trying to just piss in the wind. He was telling you what the agenda is. And Joe Biden, again, told you what the agenda was when he said that Beto O'Rourke was going to be his head of the gun problem. Now, he never ended up making Beto O'Rourke a gun control czar or anything like that. However, both Biden and Beto were very clear in what they were saying. We're coming for your assault rifles. And again, let's not beat around the bush here. The Second Amendment exists precisely so you could have military-style weaponry. It's not so you can defend yourself against muggers, though you certainly can defend yourself against muggers, and that is implied by it. It's not so you can go hunting, and you certainly can go hunting, and again, that is implied by it. In fact, it's not even so you can defend against an invasion or insurrection, although, again, very useful, very recognized in that Second Amendment, right? If the Russians invade, for example, it will be very, very, very awesome that we have an armed population, and people will realize that very quickly. And if you don't believe me, look at the fact that they ended up giving all the Ukrainian citizens guns once the Russians invaded there. However, none of that is the point. The actual point of the Second Amendment is so when the United States government says, hey, you no longer have a Second Amendment, we can say, try me. That's the point. That is why it exists. That's literally why the revolution happened. In fact, that's kind of the definition of revolutions, isn't it? Anyways, the Senate did take up and pass a rare bipartisan bill to address gun violence earlier this year. I hinted at that earlier. The bill expanded background checks for people under the age of 21, provided support for red flag style laws at the state level, and expanded the country's mental health supports. Friday's vote comes after earlier I don't think that's typed out correctly. Friday's vote comes after earlier this week. The House punted plan. Yeah, that doesn't sound like it works. Maybe get an editor, or maybe I'm just stupid. Anyways, I'll just read it as is. Friday's vote comes after earlier this week. The House punted planned vote on the assault weapons ban, as well as package of police grant bills amid divisions in the Democratic caucus. That whole sentence is just a travesty. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in a floor speech Friday, the chamber would pass some form of bills when it returns next month for votes on budget reconciliation pack. What? The chamber would pass some form of those bills when it returns next month for vote. Okay. Yeah, that one I was just reading retardedly, but the first one was an absolute travesty. So my apologies. I can English, I swear. Jenny. I may not be a smart man, Jenny, but I do know what love is. Sorry, I gotta make fun of myself. The Democrats who voted against the bill, all heroes, by the way, because they are going against their party. Isn't it amazing we have Republicans voting for the bill and Democrats voting against it? What world do we live in? Anyways, the Democrats who voted against the bill were Representatives Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, that's shocking, Jared Golden of Maine, and Ron Kind of Wisconsin. Republicans who voted for the measure are Chris Jacobs of New York and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. All right. So, there you have that. Let's see. We got 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Slim Shady, you're on. So I don't have actual time to read some of the other articles I wanted to read, so I'll only read one more, and we'll move the rest to Thursday. That is this one here, which I thought is interesting. Reverend Tony Spell for Senate. He's considering challenging John Kennedy's reelection bid. Now, this did not end up happening. Tony Spell did not end up seeking to unseat Republican John Kennedy. However, I did want to note it because it could potentially happen in the future, and I actually think it would be relatively wise. I think it'd be a good idea for Pastor Spell to consider some sort of run for political office. I would personally recommend the governor's seat, challenging John Bel Edwards. John Bel Edwards not only is a Democrat, but on top of that, he is the one behind the harmful lockdown measures that Pastor Spell has been fighting since 2020, and of course actually won earlier this year. But it was interesting to note that he was considering running for the senatorial seat. And so even though this didn't end up happening, even though this article, which was published about a month ago, is outdated at this point, I did still want to let you guys know about it and to say that I think this is something that could come in the future and something that I would actually probably endorse. Pastor Spell, if this ever ends up getting to you, I personally think it would be very wise for you to seek the governor's seat, Republican nomination, independent, however you decide to do it, Constitution Party, I don't care. But I think it would be wise. I think you'd have a legitimate chance of winning. You obviously have a fairly large congregation. That's at least, 1,000 votes already. And it's a challenge that certainly should be pushed forward, right? John Bel Edwards is a thug. John Bel Edwards is a tyrant, or at least he wishes to be. And I think that Pastor Spell is a hero, a genuine hero, one of the rare heroes we talk about from the 60s and stuff like that, like Rosa Parks. I think that Tony Spell is that kind of a hero. And it's, I think, very awesome to see what has transpired in the last year with him actually beating the Covidians, Branch Covidians. Let's go with that one. That one's not one that I came up with, though, so I can't claim that I've been clever here. But Branch Covidians, very awesome. And if he ends up using the popularity he's gotten from this to actually make our country better, either through a governor's seat or a senator's seat, I think that would be entirely a benefit. But nonetheless, briefly, we'll read this article. U.S. Senator John N. Kennedy is on a glide path to re-election this fall, national political handicappers say. I really like John Kennedy personally. But anyways, he has a bulging campaign war chest and a popularity rating above 50%. I'm way too tired. And is a Republican running in a state where no Democrat has been elected to the U.S. Senate since 2008. The Reverend Tony Spell might upset the equation. Spell, the charismatic and controversial Pentecostal pastor of the Life Tabernacle Church in Central, said he is considering challenging Kennedy. He is a Republican who would compete with Kennedy for conservative voters. Spell will have to decide on his plans soon. The qualifying period is July 20th to 22nd. Of course, we're past that now. He did not end up running. I'm discussing it, he said in an interview. Spell seems especially animated by what he describes as the failure by Kennedy to support him after Governor John Bel Edwards imposed crowd restrictions on churches, including Life Tabernacle, during the early days of the pandemic as a public health measure. Spell defied Edwards and was arrested as a result. Quote, I reached out to Kennedy for help, and they were totally oblivious, end quote, Spell said. He sought relief by filing an appeal. In a 5-2 vote, the state Supreme Court ruled in his favor in May that restrictions on religious gatherings violated the state and U.S. Constitution. The ruling dismissed 6 misdemeanors, filed against the pastor. Spell also condemns U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, who is another Republican. You have Cipher Bill Cassidy and absent John Kennedy, Spell said. They are as useless as the next. If he ran, Spell said he supports Donald Trump's call to build a wall along the border with Mexico, and he decries the increase in crime, but he might not fit neatly into a conservative box. Spell mentioned several times that his congregation, which he said numbers 10,000, consists of many whites and racial minorities, which, of course, it's ridiculous for the advocate to assume that that is somehow not him fitting with the conservative box, right? Plenty of minorities are conservative, and it's insulting to suggest otherwise. Quote, a Trump Republican will not get the black vote or the Latino vote that they would need to beat Kennedy, end quote, Spell said, quote, but the right person would, end quote. And that is varying true. Notice he put the qualifier Trump Republican. Trump did actually get more of the black vote in 2020 than any Republican has gotten since Richard Nixon back in 1968. And that was only 33%, but nonetheless, it was still massive compared to the absolutely disgustingly low voter turnout that has been, the black voter turnout that has been for Republicans in the past. Sorry. With that being said, though, 33% is still jack, right? And there is a lot of reasons for people saying that sort of thing. I think that it is true that a conservative who properly articulates conservative values and finds a way to kind of break through the Democratic propaganda, does certainly have more of an opportunity to win the black vote. I think that we'll probably see a lot more people like that after the Blexit, right? People like Candace Owens and the officer Tatum, Brandon Tatum, and many others, Ben Carson, of course, right? Many others have made it cool to be a black Republican, right? Or a black conservative, at least, because loyalty to party is irrelevant. Nobody cares. And so with that Blexit having occurred, I do think it's more likely you'll find conservatives actually speaking to that demographic as time goes on. Now, part of the problem is they do have to wade through a lot of propaganda, right? For example, people have been talking for quite some time about welfare being pro-black, when in reality, it's anti-American total. Black or white, doesn't matter. Welfare is bad. Welfare can sometimes be good, but the welfare state we currently have is bad. And when people are convincing you, hey, that's pro-black, therefore people who are against welfare are against blacks, well, you have to wade through that propaganda. You have to cut through it, right? You have to reveal to specifically the black voting population, hey, that's bogus, that's nonsense, that's BS, right? Bologna, as I like to say. Is Spell that right person? Maybe. I don't know. Spell 44 said he grew up in Zachary, as Kennedy 70 did more than 2 decades earlier. Until now, the biggest question facing Kennedy is whether any of the 3 Democrats challenging him can capture enough votes in the November 8th primary to force him into a runoff, and they won't. Oh, my goodness. One of the Democrats is Luke Mixon, a former Navy fighter pilot who flies now for Delta Airlines and has Edwards' support. Another is John Bel Edwards, the governor, Another is Gary Chambers Jr., a social justice activist who has won attention nationwide by running as an unapologetic progressive willing to challenge the white political establishment. I hate The Advocate so much. The only reason we read The Advocate is because it's a local Louisiana newspaper, but they're just such a crap newspaper. The Advocate, if you ever read this, you suck. But at any rate, if you ever read this, anyway. A third is Citria Stibe, who is an executive director of a group in New Orleans that helps women, back on their feet after their release from prison. So, thought it was interesting. I think it would be cool to see Pastor Spell actually run for Senate. I think it'd be even cooler to see him run for the governor's seat. But nonetheless, of course, we'll see if anything like that ends up happening. So we will be here very, very soon, hopefully, Lord willing, on Thursday. On Thursday, what we are going to be doing is discussing the assembly at WCC. We'll be discussing the World Economic Forum, and we'll be discussing a lot more other stuff that we weren't able to get to today. Artur Pawlowski, some more stuff with Pastor Spell, etc. If you liked this episode, please do consider liking and sharing the video. Please consider subscribing if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. I want to remind you guys to be watchdogs. And, of course, I want to ask you the question, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? Shalom.